Okay, welcome everybody who's here, including choir. It's very good to see you. Sorry about the disruption, not being able to go to the usual venue, but this is an appropriate venue because of all its associations with peace and anti-war. I'll just give you some examples for those of you who don't know. It's pretty old news. But in 1914, the Independent Labour Party and the Glasgow branch of the Peace Society organised an anti-war demonstration on the Green. 5,000 people took part to protest against the war which just started a few days earlier. Helen Crawford and Mary Doulton in 1915 founded the branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and in June 19 organised a conference which led to the formation of the Glasgow Women's Peace Crusade. They held regular meetings on the Green and street meetings nearby in Bridgeton, Parkhead and Shettleston. James Maxton spoke on the Green. He was also the MP for Bridgeton. And Helen Crawford and James Maxton served terms in prison, one of which was Duke Street, just to the north of here, an experience which some of our members have had campaigning against nuclear weapons. And in July 1917, the Women's Peace Crusade organised a mass demonstration in Glasgow. Reports at the time said that from two sides of the city, processions wound their way round, accompanied by banners and bands. And when they got to the Green, there were 14,000 people here. Would that we could do the same today, 14,000 people. So the Green is a place very much associated with peace, anti-war demonstrations. And today we're very fortunate to have three very good speakers to talk to us. I want to introduce them first. David Kelly, Andy Sanders, sorry Michael, and Jean Anderson. But first of all, I'm going to introduce Professor Herman the Choir, who is going to sing to us. Polly.
Thank you. Thanks everybody, it's great to be here. It's good that you're still commemorating the horrendous bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The first song we're going to sing you might know, so please join in. Any of the songs you've heard before, please join in. This one's called Down by the River Clyde, and you know what's down by the River Clyde, but you don't want to be there. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. Ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war no more. Down by the River Clyde, I'm gonna lay my burden down, and I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna sing out my song of peace, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. I'm gonna sing out my song of peace, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. Ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war no more. Down by the River Clyde, I'm gonna lay my burden down, and I ain't gonna study war no more. I'm gonna shake hands with everyone, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. I'm gonna shake hands with everyone, down by the River Clyde, down by the River Clyde. We ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war no more, we ain't gonna study war war no more. Down by the river Clyde, I'm gonna lay my burden down, and I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Down by the river Clyde, I'm gonna lay my burden down, and I ain't gonna study war no more.
So the next one is there's no guitar and it's Deep Blue Sea. I'm just going to find you. So we've got no, hold on. So we'll start together.
Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. We want peace in all the lands, and you're the deep blue sea. Sleep, my child, you are safe and sound. Sleep, my child, you are safe and sound. Sleep, my child, you are safe and sound. And you are peace in all the land, and you're the deep blue sea. Still today, warm clouds hang so low. Still today, warm clouds hang so low. Still today, war clouds hang so low. We want peace in all the lands, and for the deep blue sea. Our own lands gonna turn their tide. Love of lives gonna turn the tide. Love of lives gonna turn the tide. We want peace in all the lands, and you're the deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. Deep blue sea, baby, deep blue sea. We want peace in all the lands, and you're the deep blue sea.
Thank you. And the next one is called Ban the Weapons. And if you were brought up Christian, you might recognise the tune as Sing Hosanna. But this is called Ban the Weapons. Da, 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 da,
Keep the joy in your heart, keep on singing. I believe we will see day when our children will see razor wire, when the submarines have gone away. Ban the weapon from the waterside. Ban the weapon from the sea. We will walk in the fields and the meadows. We will swim in the waters blue. We will dig in the earth all together, for one day we'll see our dreams come true. Ban the weapon from the waterside. Ban the weapons from the sea. Ban the weapons from the waterside. Ban the weapons from the sea.
Choir will be singing again later. Now to introduce David Kelly. There he is. Look. Unknown to all of you. Yeah, quite. Vice Chair of SCND, Vice Chair of Glasgow CND, Member of Peace Education Scotland Committee. David, you're going to share a few words with us.
Thanks, David. I sat down a few days ago and wondered, what could I say that might offer fresh insight into the tragedy at Hiroshima 78 years ago today? Of course, there is none. The facts are all in. We know what happened. We know why it happened. And we know it didn't end the war, but instead started a new reign of terror. All of us here have lived in the shadow of this terror all of our lives. But today, here, rather than campaigning against nuclear weapons, we gather to remember the victims of the bombing of Hiroshima on the 78th anniversary of the first use of the atomic bomb during a war. And 3 days later, the city of Nagasaki was visited by the same obscene machine. As I grow older, I'm at more events that commemorate someone's death. Usually, I've known those who have passed. It's always appropriate to remember them with light and even humour. I didn't know any of those victims from 78 years ago. It is impossible to commemorate their lives in anything other than shocked solemnity. Even now, and here we are. When I read David's introduction, he said something nice about me mentioning my name, and I thought at first that's a hook for a joke, but it's not. We don't gather on the day the RAF killed 37,000 people in Hamburg in Operation Gomorrah. We don't mark the extraordinary devastation of Operation Meeting House when the US Army Air Force firebombed Tokyo with the loss of about 100,000 people and the destruction of 1 million homes, the single biggest military killing ever. But everyone here knows the name Enola Gay, the single aircraft that carried Little Boy, a 15-kiloton uranium fission device, rather than the hundreds of aircraft involved in conventional mass murder. 3 days later, on the 9th of August, Nagasaki was destroyed, and the Soviet Union broke their neutrality pact with Japan. The Japanese ruling elite knew that Russian invasion meant the game was up. They had to surrender immediately to the United States or be overrun by the Russians. We only found out about this relatively recently when the Japanese cabinet papers were released. For more than half my lifetime, I was fed the myth that lives had been saved by the atomic bomb because their use was why Japan surrendered. If someone's understanding of history only comes from what they learned at school, they may even still believe it. So many lies surround the development and use of these weapons. Every part of the process, from gathering the uranium, refining it, processing it, to exploding it on humanity, is poisonous. They keep us safe, good grief, they keep us safe. There has been lots of silly talk about the rise of artificial intelligence leading to a machine that would rule us. Well, I suggest that perhaps we've already built it and we keep ours at Faz Lane. They keep us safe. Now we know they didn't save anybody and never will. Some of the poison generated by this huge industry has been left for our children and grandchildren to deal with. The Marshall Islands, almost as far from us standing here today as it's possible in the planet, was the location of the callous testing of hydrogen bombs. The medical emergency in the Marshallese people continues to this day, 3 generations later. This irradiated so much material that the US government built an enormous concrete structure, the Runit Dome, where they put the most dangerous irradiated material and material imported from similar tests in the United States. The dome is at sea level. The sea level is rising. The engineering for ensuring it is safe is disputed. Its contents are not documented, and the responsibility for it is ludicrously allocated to the Marshall Islands government, a tiny country that is fast disappearing into the Pacific Ocean. Of course, there is really only one ocean, and we all share it. Throughout the last 78 years, there have been incidents that have brought us close to nuclear war, and these are presented to us as triumphs of diplomacy rather than the inevitable consequences of the so-called Cold War. Close reading of the Cuban Missile Crisis tells us more than was revealed at the time. American deployment of the Jupiter missile system in Turkey predates the deployment of Russian missiles in Cuba and might have been Khrushchev's motivation. Nobody in the Western world knew about the American missiles in Russia's borders. That we escaped this crisis does seem to have required luck, at least as much as diplomacy. Napoleon famously said that his favourite attribute for a general was luck. Well, you can't keep rolling sixes. In 1995, a very high-altitude 4-stage weather rocket launched in Norway was communicated to the Russian authorities in advance, who forgot to tell their own military radar operations. A simple clerical error nearly ended the world. Students of the Cold War know there are many more such mistakes. Only one accident. That's all that's needed, just a simple mistake. The amount of money spent in weapon systems never used would have ended world hunger, provided fresh drinking water for everyone, and given every child an education. Instead, we keep scared and carry on. The brief glimpse of light when the Soviet Union collapsed did take the military-industrial complex by surprise, but it wasn't long before the proxy war started again and the share price of armament manufacturers recovered. The UK, struggling for international relevance and suffering from post-imperial stress disorder, has announced an increase in our glorious stockpile of nuclear weapons to be kept just up the road at Coolport. That this is clearly in contravention of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty that we have signed up to matters not a whit to our government. And now, in the proxy war series' most dangerous adventure, the war in Ukraine unfolds. Pushing the boundaries of what is possible without actually ending humanity's existence, we've discovered that the conventional forces of Russia, which stopped Napoleon and Hitler, cannot defeat a cabaret comedian running a country next door. This is NATO versus Russia, not the war to end all wars, but possibly our very existence has started. How will it end? We can't tell. The disintegration of Russia's conventional forces, the possible disintegration of the Russian state, is a terrifying prospect in a country with thousands of nuclear weapons. Russia is quite clear they will use nuclear weapons to defend their territory. They have been just as clear that Ukraine is their territory. What can we do faced with this madness? Today we just need to remember the reality of the nuclear threat and its impact 78 years ago. Tomorrow, keep telling the truth about nuclear weapons. But right now, can I ask for a minute's silence to remember the victims of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the indigenous people sacrificed to test this abomination.
you. Thank you very much, David. That was excellent. Thank you. The next speaker is Andy Sanders. Andy has the distinction of having taken part in the Aldermaston March, especially in very much. Andy, over to you.
Better users, can you hear me all right? Yes. And don't get think you're getting off lightly. If I go and sit down, I won't be finished. I can't stand for that long sometime. Anyway, my twin brother and I were 7 years old in 1945. There wasn't a lot of celebration for our birthdays on the 18th of July, but there was a celebration. We were celebrating, first of all, the end of the war in Europe. That meant we didn't need to go into the air raid shelters. And where I lived in, it's all gone now, Parliamentary Road, just off Parliamentary Road. The air raid shelter were in the Dunny underneath. And I can remember quite clearly being collected in there, all the wains. I've lost count how many wains were in our close, but there were 4 of us, and my mother and all the other families were in these dunnies. That stopped. We didn't need to do that anymore. We also didn't need to carry our gas masks up the road, up Barley Road, up McCausland Street to school in St James's Road. That was a relief too. But most of all, the biggest celebration was because my dad had been demobbed from the army, demobbed early, and he came back. So we were together again, and he went back to his job as a postman. Then Hiroshima, and even at the age of 7, I knew that something ghastly had happened. You've got to remember that in wartime, propaganda puts out all sorts of things about the enemy. They're subhuman. They're anything but like us. And of course, Japanese, there was a racist dimension as well. But that changed for me, and I'm sure for others, when the pictures and the newsreels came out about Hiroshima. You saw these bewildered people, the survivors wandering about. You saw the bizarre effects of nuclear weapons on walls, for God's sake, on the environment, and you heard about the casualties. That changed forever. I won't get into the political aspects. David and Brian before him have dealt with the political aspects. But what I would say, the opposition to nuclear weapons began almost immediately. In fact, it began before they were used, because many scientists were opposed to their use and wanted some sort of demonstration. And even Oppenheimer himself said that it was against their being used, and but when they were used, he said, famously declared, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." Oppenheimer, incidentally, was even for control of nuclear power. He wanted United Nations to control nuclear power. However, as I say, as I grew older and into my teens, things grew worse. Both the Labour and Tory governments were enthusiastic about developing our own nuclear weapons. The reason they gave was we wanted to be a world power. The fact that God knows how many other countries didn't have nuclear weapons, didn't want them, didn't want to waste money on them, and were still very influential in the world, didn't enter their minds. They wanted to be world powers. This ideology was made even more clear to me when I was called up to the army in 1957. When we were parading about the Salisbury Plain, we were told, I don't know many times, that we had to have nuclear weapons to declare to defend our country. We were endlessly lectured at that. The curious thing was that when I had to go and guard the guard duty wasn't about nuclear weapons. It was about the IRA, who at that time were raiding armories for arms for their struggle in Ireland. So it wasn't, I didn't become at all support of nuclear weapons, and my reasoning against it remained. Now, Britain at that time had troops all over the world. It was very worrying because I could have gone to Malaya. Korea had just finished. Suez affected me because before that you went into the army for 18 months, but after Suez it was extended to 2 years. But I was very lucky. I was posted to Newcastle upon Tyne, and I was there for the rest of my service. Now this place and my service became quite useful to me in a curious way, not because I could fire a 303 or a Sten gun, but because many years later I discovered, and Brian told me the name, which I've forgotten, a general in the army, now in the House of Lords, was opposed to the development of Trident. So I wrote to the House of Lords, to Lord whatever his name was, and saying, as a former military man like yourself, 23390-185 Private Sanders, who served on the Eastern Front, brackets, Benham Barracks, Newcastle upon Tyne, I would like to congratulate you on your stand in Trident. I didn't get any reply from him. I'm disappointed at that, but I'm sure he was grateful for my letter. Now, being one who operates against nuclear weapons can have its advantages. In 1960, the early 1960s, the usual thing for a young man was to ask a young lady, would you like to go to the pictures? But I asked a young lady, would you like to go to Aldermaston? And she came with me, and we're still together 60 odd years later, just sitting there. In fact, to be fair to Maureen, in her own right, she went down to Greenham Common and demonstrated with her friends too, so we kept it going. And even when we had a family, we didn't stop. Our daughters still remember being trailed about God knows where in demonstrations all over. And I remember one in particular going on the Waverley down to Doulton to demonstrate at the Holy Law. In fact, there's a picture of me someplace standing beside George MacLeod, Lord George MacLeod, listening to a pipe band from one of the pits playing. And I often think if people see that picture, they'll be saying, who's that standing beside me, Andy Sanders, but it was Lord George MacLeod. Anyway, we marched round to the Holy Loch and demonstrated there, and we have continued. In fact, I was talking about the benefits of, a number of years ago, I was arrested down at Fastlane, and I was locked up with two people. One turned out to be a Cambridge-educated ex-naval officer, and the other one was a lung specialist he lived up in the north of Scotland. We became great friends from then, and we tried to meet up, in fact, every year on the anniversary of our incarceration. So anybody here who hasn't campaigned or demonstrated, you meet a very high class of people in the cells in Scotland if you get arrested, However, the biggest reward recently for me is not meeting these people, is the fact that we now have a parliament in Scotland which is against nuclear weapons and wants them removed. The only thing that stops us is we don't have the power to remove them, and I'm going to celebrate the day when we do have that power and get them moved from Scotland. I want to finish by going back to Aldermaston. I remember, Maureen remembered too, when we marched along the road, we were singing a song Men and women stand together. Do not heed the men of war. Make your minds up now or never. Ban the bomb forevermore.
Now we're going to have the choir singing again.
So the next song we're going to do is War Machine. We've updated the words, and it's all about how war is very, very profitable in capitalism.
We're doing War Machine, you're going to do the chorus. Skies, the rockets fly, and uranium-filled tanks roll by. There's cluster bombs and tyranny from UK, US, PLC as the war machine rolls round. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the click and the clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. And the prisoner sleeping where he fell will awake to one more day of hell from a US battened searing pain. His body bound by a British chain as the war machine rolls round. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the clink and clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. We've an industry that lives and thrives, making tools to shatter human lives. And our honest workers ply their skill, helping distant tyrants maim and kill as the war machine rolls round. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the clink and clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. We are searching for the peacemakers, John Hume and Gandhi's successors, to forge a path against the drive of war and blood, but to survive and stop the war machine. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the clink and clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. It is time, my friends, for us to say we will not sell death to earn our pay. It is time for arms exports to cease, for the world can never live in peace as the war machine rolls round. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the clink and clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. And the war machine rolls round and round, and the poor and the weak get trampled to the ground. And from where we stand, their cries are drowned by the clink and the clank of the dollar and the pound as the war machine rolls round. All we are saying is give peace a chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance. Thank you.
So we like the flowers now. Any sisters who were in?
So now we're going to do We Like the Flowers. Any sisters who were in the Girl Guides or the Brownies, you might know this one. There's a few changes to the lyrics. We Like the Flowers. Here we go.
We like the flowers, we like the vegetables, we hate reactors and try the missiles. We want to live in a nuclear society with no plutonium, 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 no plutonium. We like the flowers, we like the vegetables, we hate reactors and try the missiles. We want to live in a nuclear-free society with no plutonium, 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 no